Good morning, Cedar Creek. Thank you. Appreciate you spending a part of this beautiful fall morning with us here. You guys loving this weather like I am? Oh man, it is so, I've been waiting for cool weather for like 8 months since it started getting hot in April, and I'm so excited, but a little bit of bad news. I checked the weather app. It's going to be in the 80s later this week. You know, listen, I've been living here all my life. It's not going to stay cool till after Halloween. It's always going to be hot on Halloween, so let's just deal with it. Let's do this. Let's agree to enjoy it while we can and just go with it. Sound like a plan? Great. Well, I am so glad you're here. Excited you're here because we are kicking off a new series of messages called Dark Horses. Now, by definition, a dark horse is a little-known person who is unlikely to succeed, who somehow, almost miraculously, ends up accomplishing great things. And we are all drawn to dark horse stories. They resonate with us. In fact, that's why most of the greatest movies of all time are dark horse stories, right? Like Rocky. Dark horse story, you know, worn out, burnt out boxer becomes heavyweight champion. Rudy, another dark horse, you know, skinny little kid plays for Notre Dame, right? Let's see what's another one. Rocky, Rudy. Oh, my favorite of all time, Braveheart. Like a Scottish orphan ends up leading his country and takes on a king and finds freedom. They're great dark horses. Some dark horse stories are actually about horses, right? Like Seabiscuit, Secretariat. We love a dark horse story. And I believe the reason we love them is because they truly inspire us. Most of them are true stories, right? And we think, well, you know, if that person could do that, then maybe I could do something with my life. Like you go to a superhero movie, you don't come out of the theater, unless you're a little kid, you don't come out of the theater thinking one day you'll be able to leap tall buildings with a single bound, right? But you come out of Rudy and you think, if that kid can play for Notre Dame, maybe I could do something significant in my life, right? We're drawn to those. We're inspired by them. Unfortunately, that inspiration is pretty short-lived. The reality of life, the work, the kids, the job, the bills that have to be paid, and we fall back into that same old kind of rut. And I wonder, over these last 6 weeks here at Cedar Creek, I wonder if maybe you've had kind of that experience on some Sunday mornings. You know, we've been talking about impact, how we're all called to live a kingdom impactful life, to live out the Great Commission, to be used to make a difference in the lives of people. And you leave out on a Sunday morning and you're inspired, like maybe God can use me, I could do something. And then you wake up and it's Monday morning and it's the kids and the spouse and the job and the bills, and you just kind of, it evaporates, right? Or maybe the enemy gets into your head and starts to whisper, God could never use you. You know that stuff. You know your past. God's never going to be able to use you. And then all of a sudden, same old, same old. Well, listen, if that's you, I've got some great news for you. One thing is crystal clear is that God does some of His best work through some of the least likely people. In fact, that's why almost every hero recorded in the Bible is a dark horse hero, right? Moses, a fugitive and a murderer. David, great King David, his own father, when he was a kid, his own father voted him least likely to succeed out of all his other brothers, right? Didn't even invite him into the house to have a chance. Ruth, remember studying her a couple of months ago? A penniless widow from a foreign country. That's a dark horse. Gideon, mighty man of God. You remember where that mighty man of God was when God found him? He was hiding in a pit, scared as a schoolgirl of the enemy. Then you flip over to the New Testament. All the disciples are dark horses, right? They're not the people you would pick to change the world. And even the Apostle Paul, on the surface, looks like, he's educated, smart, influential. But he's not the guy you would have picked to plant most of the early New Testament churches, right? Because he was a persecutor of the churches. Not the guy you'd pick to write 2/3 of the New Testament. God loves to move and work in dark horses. And I believe the reason is because he gets the glory when that happens, right? You don't look at a dark horse and go, well, yeah, aren't they wonderful? No, you look at a dark horse and go, oh my gosh, what kind of God did they have that somebody like that could do something like this? In fact, the Bible tells us clearly in 1 Corinthians 10 that the purpose of these stories, the lives of these people recorded in the Bible, were recorded not just to inspire us like some distant superhero. They were recorded specifically to be examples to us, that we can learn from them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so that's what we're going to do. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at some dark horses who I'm convinced have a lot to teach us about God. They have a lot to teach us about ourselves. And they have a lot to teach us about how to live out a life of faith. And I figured we ought to start with the darkest of all dark horses. In my opinion, this is the darkest dark horse in the entire Bible. She is a woman by the name of Rahab. And you'll find her story in the Old Testament book of Joshua. So if you have a Bible or a Bible app, go ahead and get to Joshua chapter 2. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 2 the whole time this morning. And I say Rahab is one of the darkest of all dark horses for a couple of reasons. One, she is a woman living in a male-dominated culture. She has no power, no influence, no say, right? Nothing. She's completely powerless. And not only that, the nation she's a part of is a direct enemy of God. She is of a nation that is at war with God's people. And not only that, she lives inside the walls of the very city that is a direct obstacle to the will of God being done. She lives in a city, the city of Jericho, that is going to be totally destroyed. And if that weren't bad enough, on top of all of that, this bad nation and this bad city, she is a prostitute in the city of Jericho. Can't get much darker than that. And yet, she ends up being a hero not only of the New Testament, of the Old Testament, but she's actually a hero in the New Testament. Rahab is one of only 3 women who are listed in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. Sometime go look at that genealogy, how Matthew, the very beginning of the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, and she is one of only 3 women mentioned in that. In fact, just so you'll know, she's the great-grandmother of King David. How's that for a dark horse? But not only is she a hero of both testaments of the Bible, but I am convinced that Rahab's story is one of the clearest pictures of the gospel in all the Bible. In fact, if they'd have asked my opinion when they were putting the Bible together and labeling the chapters, I would have labeled Joshua chapter 2 as the gospel according to Rahab, because that's exactly what it is. Now, I know some of you think, wait a minute, Philip, you're confused. The gospel is New Testament. That's Jesus. Right? Rahab's all the way back in the Old Testament. How could she have anything to do with the gospel? Well, look, the Bible is not two different stories of a God who said, a mean God who said there are rules and regulations and I'm going to smite you. And then that didn't work, so he switched over to be the kind God and let's do for them what they can. No, the Bible is one continuous story from Genesis to Revelation. And it has one hero, and his name is Jesus. And it points to one thing, and that is the gospel of Jesus and the power of that gospel to transform lives. That's why you'll find throughout the Old Testament stories, you'll find these preflections, not reflections, but preflections of the gospel story in the Bible. And none is better, in my opinion, than Rahab. And so as we unpack our story, we're going to see obviously the power of the gospel to transform any life. But we're also going to see some practical ways that your dark horse story and my dark horse story can be used by God to advance His kingdom in our time and our generation. Now, I know everybody didn't grow up in the church hearing these stories, so let me give you a little bit of context. Joshua 2, this is where Rahab's story takes place. The children of Israel are about to go into the promised land. They're about to cross Jordan and go into the promised land. Now remember, this is the second generation, right? Because the first generation crossed the desert when Moses was leading them. Moses sent 12 spies in. They came back out and voted 10-2 against going in to give the land that God had promised them. So God had them wander around the desert for 40 years until that generation died, including Moses. In fact, the only two people left at this point are Joshua and Caleb, the two spies who voted to go in, right? So now Joshua's leading the people. They're getting ready to go into the land. And so Joshua sends two spies into the city of Jericho to check it out. Now, this has nothing to do with the message, but I found it interesting that Moses sent 12 spies and Joshua only sent 2. And I wondered why. Well, I believe Joshua discovered that the level of indecision is directly proportional to the size of the committee making that decision. So he just sent 2 spies in. They go in behind the walls of Jericho. They're sneaking around. They're checking everything out. And so they have to hide. They have to have a place to hide. And so they end up hiding in the house of Rahab the prostitute. Now, on the surface, that makes these 2 guys seem sketch, right? Why do these 2 guys go and spend the night in the prostitute's house? It's not what you think. There's actually a strategic reason. One is that Rahab's house is literally built into the wall of the city of Jericho. She don't live in the city. She lives in the wall of the city. She has a window that faces out through the wall, and she's right by the gate. So that's a good strategic place to be. And I think, secondly, if you need somebody to keep a secret, probably Rahab the prostitute, the red light district, pretty good place. They're professional secret keepers. So I don't know. I'm just making this up as I go. I don't know why. But even though they're hiding there, somehow the king of Jericho finds out that there are 2 spies from the nation of Israel and that they're at Rahab's house. So he sends guards. They knock on the door. Rahab opens the door and says, yeah, the 2 spies were here. But they left right before the sun went down. They snuck out the gate. Now, she's lying, right, because they're hiding upstairs under bales of hay. And the soldiers go, okay, thank you, Rahab. Off they go. Then Rahab goes up to them and says, all right, guys, I have done this. I've protected you. I've lied for you. So when y'all take over the city, when y'all come in, you have to take care of me and my family, my mother, my father, my brothers, my sisters. And the spies are like, deal. They shake on it, high fives, whatever they do, pinky swear. All right. And then, of course, maybe you know the rest of the story. They march around the city of Jericho for 7 days. Finally, the whole wall collapses. The city is completely consumed by fire, and the good guys win. Great story. But as you walk through Rahab's story, what we're going to see, obviously, are 3 keys to a gospel-transformed life. 3 things I believe we can learn by looking at Rahab's life. You might want to write these down. The first thing we want to look at is what she brings. What she brings to God. Now, on the surface, right, she brings nothing. She's got nothing to the table, right, that God could use. But actually, there are 2 things that she brings that are the only 2 things that we can bring to God. The first one, the first thing Rahab brought to God? Sin. She brought sin. And you're like, well, how does that encourage me, Phil? I'll tell you how. Because that's all you've got to bring to God. That's all we have. That is the heart of the gospel. And she doesn't bring a little bit of sin. She brings a lot of sin. She's the lowest of the low, the dirtiest of the dirty. In fact, some historians believe that the reason Jericho, the whole city, had to be destroyed by fire is because ancient walled cities like that were a hotbed of diseases. You got people crammed in there. And so they were so disease-ridden that if the nation of Israel had just occupied the city and left the walls and just moved in there, that they would catch those diseases. Here's what I also know. If there is a disease in a city, there's a pretty good chance the prostitute has that disease. So how does that encourage me? Because until you realize that all you have to bring to God is your sin, you're never going to fully be transformed by the gospel. As long as you think that you're in some kind of transactional relationship with God, like I give my life, my stuff, my money, my talent, I give all this to God, and then in exchange, God rescues me and gives me eternal life and gives me... As long as you think your relationship with God is transactional like that, you'll never be transformed by the gospel. That is a false gospel. Throughout the Bible, the gospel is clear. The only thing we have to bring to God is sin, and we have to start there. We start thinking about God working in our lives, God using us to make an impact. We immediately think about our gifts, our talents, our money, our resources, our skills, our experiences. And yes, God is going to work in and through those, but He doesn't need those. He can do anything He wants, any way He wants. He invites us into the privilege of being used and being a part of His kingdom, but the only thing we have to bring God is our sin. And then there is a second thing that Rahab brought to God that we have to bring to Him, and that is faith. Faith. I want you to really look at what Rahab says to the spies. This is in verses 8 through 11. This is Rahab talking to the spies. She says, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea, right, when they were leaving Egypt. And we also heard what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan. These are 2 countries the Israelites destroyed, before they crossed into the promised land. And then she goes on to say, we heard of it, and our hearts melted in fear. Right? But then listen to this confession. This is Rahab. She says, for your Lord our God is God in heaven and above and on earth below. Do you see that confession of faith? Your God is God. Right? But a couple things I don't want you to miss on Rahab's confession here. One, she's basing her faith on what she has heard, not what she has seen. Right? The parting of the Red Sea was 40 years ago. She probably wasn't even born then. And if she was a little kid. She was not there when the nation of Israel destroyed the 2 kings east of the Jordan. She had only heard of what God had done. She had not personally experienced any of it. She had heard about God and what He could do. But you know what? What does the Bible say about faith? You remember that part in Romans? Faith comes from what? Hearing. And hearing comes from the word, the actions of the Lord. Second thing I want you to notice, she had the same information as everybody else around them. Notice it, go back and look at 8 through 11. She says, we, the whole nation, everybody behind the walls, we know how powerful you God. Everybody had the same information. The difference is she believed. And it is that belief, that faith, is what ended up saving her. And they said, whoa, wait a minute, Philip. I thought she was saved because of her works, because she hid the spies. It was a deal. It was a transaction. She'd do this, God would do this. No. She was saved because of her faith in who their God was, and it was that faith that caused her to do those works. That's why she hid the spies, because she had faith and saw how powerful their God was. It always works like that. Right? Faith leads us to works. Works will never lead you to faith. You cannot be good enough. You cannot behave good enough. You cannot pack enough shoe boxes or help enough poor people to get faith. Faith comes first. Then the works are the natural overflow of our faith. I'll prove it to you. Look at Hebrews 11. This is over in the New Testament. It says, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Do you notice the order? Faith led to works. You still don't believe me? Let me give you words right from the horse's mouth. Jesus. I hope it's okay, Lord, to call you the horse's mouth. It's Dark Horses series. I don't mean anything by it. But here's the thing. One day, Jesus' disciples came to him and said, how do we do the works of God? What are the works of God? And you know what Jesus said? To believe in the one that he sent. We bring God our sin. We bring him our faith. And now God can begin to do extraordinary things in and through our dark horse lives and realities. You want to be used by God? You want to make an impact? Bring him your sin and your little bit of faith, and he can use you. Second thing I want us to learn from Rahab, I want us to look at what she seeks. What she seeks from God. Because she not only has faith in God, but she desires something from God. In fact, two things she desires. Write these down. First, she seeks God's favor. She seeks favor, God's favor in her life and in the life of her family. Notice what she says to the spies, verses 12 and 13. She says, swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. She is looking for a rescue. That sounds like gospel to me, right? She is looking for a rescue. I put my faith in God. I invite him in, and he rescues me from eternal damnation. He saves me. And listen, church, there are only two options when you encounter God. There are only two ways you can respond to an encounter with God. You can either seek his favor, or you can try to fortify your own position. Right? And that's exactly what separated Rahab from everybody else behind the walls of Jericho. They all knew he was a powerful God. She sought his favor. They just dug in and tried to fortify their own position. They did not want to submit or surrender. Right? And sometimes we do that, don't we? We know God is moving and we're being convicted of these things. We know we need to make these changes, but we're like, no, I don't want to. We dig in, we fortify our position. Or sometimes we pretend like we're seeking God's favor, but we're really just trying to fortify our own position. right? We like, God, rescue me, and here's how I need you to do it. I need you to fix this and this and this. God, bless me, God, I seek your favor. Now here's my list of things to bless me with, right? Like God is some vending machine, right? That's not seeking God's favor. That's just a veiled attempt to fortify my own position and try to continue to control my life. She seeks God's favor, but there's a second thing she seeks of God, and that is the impossible. She seeks the impossible. Remember, where is Rahab's house? It's built into the walls around Jericho. You remember the song from Sunday school? What happens to the walls of Jericho? They come a-tumbling down, right? And it's not like they're all the wall except where Rahab's house is. All of the walls come tumbling down. And the entire city is destroyed by fire. What she's asking God to do to spare her and her whole family that have to stay in the wall, literally in the wall that's coming down. I mean, go back and read it. The spies don't say, listen, the way to be saved is to get to the middle of the city and get down underground somewhere because the walls are coming down. They're like, the only way you can be saved is to stay in the house that is built into the wall that's going to come tumbling down. I don't know how they were rescued. I just know that they were. But I also know this. Sometimes the only way God can rescue you is to tear down everything around you. Things that you are seeking as idols, things that you are holding on too tightly to. Listen, some of you are facing impossible situations in your life, and you're crying out to God, rescue me. Just understand that rescue may be a painful journey. There may be some things that God needs to tear out of your life. It's going to hurt to have those things. Theologians call it sanctification, becoming more like Jesus, growing spiritually. Can I just tell you, sanctification is a painful, messy journey. That's why Jesus didn't say, come and follow me and live an ever-improving quality and comfort level in your life. What did Jesus say? Come to me and die. Lay down your life. Let go of the walls and the barriers and the houses and the possessions and the people that are keeping you from that rescue. I know there's a song, I forget who sang it, but it's a churchy song about God of angel armies. And so y'all pray, we pray, God, send the angel armies. You understand that angels are big, bad mothers with swords, and they are fighters, right? Be careful if you call the angel, some stuff in your life is going to get cut, right? But stuff in my life, maybe yours, needs to be cut. Finally, number 3, when you let that happen, when you bring your sin, give Him your little bit of faith, seek His favor, ask the impossible, here's where the good news gets. All right, we're going to end on some good news. I want you to look at what Rahab gets, what she gets from God. 3 amazing things. 1, she gets a promise. She gets a promise from God. It comes verbally through the 2 spies, but because they're representatives of God, this is a promise of God. Verse 14, check it out. The spies say, our lives for your lives. The men assured her, promised her, if you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. Did you notice that promise was conditional? It was conditional, right? Let me tell you something. God's love for you, unconditional. Most all of God's promises to you are conditional. They don't just come because you wake up and breathe. They come because of some steps you take. But here's the great thing about God's promises. You get a promise from God's word and you hold on to it, it will get you through the toughest stuff of life. Listen, Rahab's about to go through the toughest week of her life. You know the story. There's 7 days of them marching around the city before the whole thing falls, right? She don't have Joshua 6 to go read the ending. She don't know what day it's happening. She's just looking out that little window watching the enemy about to destroy her city. Day after day after day. They can't leave the room. They can't leave the house. I mean, you'd think it was bad post-Hurricane Helene? Imagine 7 days shut up with her whole family, just not knowing what was about to happen. But she had a promise from God, and it got her through. Not only did she get a promise from God, but she also got a pledge. She got a pledge from God. Now, if you don't know what a pledge is a tangible token of a promise made. Right? Something you can touch, you can feel. That is a token, a pledge of that promise. By the way, your cash money, you know what it is? It's a pledge of a promise. Right? The money, the greenback has no value at all except the paper and the ink. It's the promise that is backed up by the federal government, which is probably not a great place. It probably is the reason it's not nearly as valuable. But when God gives you something you can see, something you can touch, something you can hold on to when that promise feels like it's fading. I love this pledge. This is beautiful. Notice verse 17. Now the men had said to her, "This oath you make us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down." Now you read that on the surface, this red cord, they tell you got to hang it in the window. Immediately you think, oh, that's so the soldiers will know that's Rahab's house, don't destroy it. That's what it seems like to us. But the truth is, they don't shoot arrows in. It's not like, what? Don't shoot arrows in the red window, the red corded window. No, they don't shoot it. They don't have any control. God brings the walls down. They don't attack it. My point is, the scarlet cord was not to help them. It was to give Rahab something to hold on to from God. And don't miss this. This is so beautiful and it's easy to miss. The pledge of God's promise is placed right in the middle of the barrier that was designed to keep God out. Right? Her window is in the wall. The cord is hung in the window, the very barrier that separated God from them. That sounds exactly like something that would happen hundreds of years later. That God would place His pledge, Jesus, into the very barrier that separates us from Him, the grave. And then He would destroy that barrier so once and for all of us could have access to the promises of God. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that powerful? Look, I don't know what's marching around your life that's got you looking out the window going, oh, I don't know how this is going to end. Oh, Lord, this is bad. But I know this, when your faith wavers, when that promise of God that you're hanging on to seems distant and maybe like God has forgotten you, I'm telling you, get your eyes on, your hands around, and your heart tied to a bloody cross and an empty tomb. There is the pledge. There is the reminder that God is faithful no matter what's marching around your life. And if you will do that, you get this third thing that Rahab got from God, and that's a pardon. She got a pardon. And to find that, we have to flip all the way over to Joshua chapter 6. Now it's happening. It's all actually happening. And Joshua says to his army, Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and the others in her house will be spared. Rahab, the darkest of all dark horses, who brought nothing but a whole lot of sin and a little bit of faith, not only survives, but she will go on to thrive. Because she's not just a picture of the gospel in the Old Testament. She plays an active role in God's redemptive work in the world. She ends up getting to be a part of the nation of Israel. She is adopted into the family of God, even though she is a foreigner, born to enemies of God. And then she ends up marrying not just some bum who lives in Israel. She ends up marrying the captain of the tribe of Judah. That's the big tribe. She ends up marrying a guy named Salmon. He's the guy walking around with the big Lion of Judah breastplate. He's the guy leading the armies around the wall and leading in praise whenever the army goes into battle. She married God's worship leader. And then they end up having a son. Guess what their son's name is? Boaz. Does that sound familiar? Remember a couple of months ago, the story of Ruth? Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, right? Another picture of the gospel. And Boaz has a son named Obed. And Obed will have a son named Jesse. And Jesse will have a son named David, who will become the greatest king the nation of Israel ever knew. And the line, the lineage through which Messiah would come. Listen, if God can do that through a dark horse like Rahab, what could He do with your life? I know you're thinking, what does that mean, Philip? What does it mean to get to be a part of God's redemptive work in the world? How does that work in my life? Well, maybe it would be just a conversation with some of those neighbors you just met because you didn't have power and you started talking to each other and helping each other, right? They've been living there 10 years. You didn't even know each other's names, but you know it now. You think that was by accident? You think maybe God was opening the door for some conversations? Maybe that's what it looks like being a part of God's redemptive work in the world. Start with that relationship. And as Pastor Rick said a couple of weeks ago, start raking that soil. Start building that relationship. Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe for you, maybe it's stepping up to lead and disciple some of our children and some of our students in our Kids Creek and Centerpoint ministry. Maybe it's stepping up in your home group to be a leader or an apprentice leader to help and encourage others. Or maybe it's just as simple as taking the time to pack a simple shoebox that can be used and leveraged to share the gospel of Jesus with children and families all around the world. I don't know what your next step is, but I know this, just like Rahab, God didn't just save you from something, He saved you for something. And that something is bigger than yourself. Would you pray with me? Oh, Jesus, I thank you for this clear image, preflection of the gospel. And I pray that your promises, your word will never return void. And so I'm claiming that promise. I'm holding on to it. I don't know who this was for. I don't know how you were speaking, how your Spirit was working in the hearts of those who heard this message today. But I know you are moving. And your kingdom is coming. And I know it seems like the walls of our nation and the walls of our culture and the walls of our families and our lives and our marriages and our children, I know it seems like the walls are coming down. And God, tear down whatever walls you got to tear down. But help us hold on to your promise and be called to be your people who live out your gospel. And we will give you glory, Lord, as lives are transformed in whatever way you lead us, Lord. It's in your name we pray. Amen.